have the, do you have the agenda in front of you, Joe?
I do. How do you want to handle the roll call?
I think what I'll do is we actually will go through, I'll just actually call folks off, and if they will just unmute and say here as I get through folks, because I know there's also some on the phone, I think, too.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
You can wave.
Group wave, right?
Thank you all for being here for our second meeting of the Star City Strong Recovery Fund Task Force. We accomplished quite a bit last week just in our initial meeting and conversations, and look forward to digging in even more today. So I really appreciate you all being here today. We're going to begin with our roll call, and Bob, I'll have you guide us through that, please.
All right. So if you don't mind, if you'll unmute and just indicate that you are here. Pam Smith.
Here.
Tommy Page.
Here.
Dan Keister.
Here.
Joshua Patrick. Gloria Manns. Andrea Micklem.
Here.
Bethany Lackey. Chanel Steelman. Antonio Segovia.
Here.
Diane Haley. Brian Wells.
Here.
Pat Pascal. Nathan Webster. Troy Cook. Tamia Franco.
Good morning, here.
Chris Bryant. Carol Rowlett.
I'm sorry, Chris Bryan is here. I couldn't get to the unmute.
Karen Pillis.
Here.
Debbie Brown. Debbie had said she was not. Ellen Stick.
Here.
Rachel Hopkins.
Here.
Jarrell Rhodes.
Here.
Cheryl Mosley.
Here.
Cynthia Lawrence.
Here.
Landon Howard.
Here.
Joyce Wall. There she is. We got James Smith. Eshelman.
Here.
Abby Hamilton.
I'm here.
Shalene Powell.
Hey, here.
Carol Tarrant.
Here.
Elda Stanko Downey.
Here.
Christian Bryant. Brianna Wilson. And Brenda Hale.
Here.
Is there anybody I did not call that's on the task force?
Bob, I just got an email from Bethany Lackey, and for some reason she did not receive the Zoom link for the meeting. I can try and send that to her real quickly.
Yeah, if you want to. For some reason, a number of the emails bounced back, and I thought I had caught them all, but I know Brenda had the same problem earlier. So, is Mignon, are you on?
She is not. She will probably call in later.
All right, thank you. And we do have a quorum, so thank you all.
Okay, give me just a moment.
No problem. Yeah, and just so you all know, while Joe's doing that, so I had sent out the first email that had the Zoom information and several attachments, and probably about half of those bounced back, most of them because apparently the files were too large for your emails. So then a second email went out with less information and mostly links to things. So hopefully everyone, I know not everyone got all of that information. And so I'll be referencing some of it, and then I'll identify maybe the way in which you can get your hands on some of that information, because some of it resides elsewhere that we can provide you with the link. So I apologize for that piece, and we'll have to figure out. I'll try to use links as much as I can to avoid that as we go forward.
Okay, that is sent.
Thank you, Joe.
So all of that being the case, some of you probably received the minutes and some of you probably did not. And our next agenda item is the reading and approval of minutes from the last meeting. We can make sure to, I believe, Tiffany, these are also posted on the website for the task force.
They are, yes.
Okay. If you,
Also,
yeah, if you, the link is in the chat box. So if you did not receive an email for some reason with the minutes in it, you can go directly to the link in the chat box and it will take you to the minutes of our last meeting. There's also a link there for the recording of our last meeting, which is also on YouTube. So you can find all the information from our meetings on that Star City Strong website.
Good morning, Joe. This is Tamia Franco.
Yes,
I make a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
thank you, Tamia. Is there a second?
I second.
Brenda Hale, thank you so much. It's been moved and seconded to receive and approve the minutes from the 6/26/2020 meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 All right, any opposed? And the motion passes. Thank you. Bob, item number 3, reports of officers.
and they're really, in this case, we have 3 officers, really, the mayor, vice mayor, and myself, and no reports. I guess I will. The mayor did ask to pass along his apologies for not being able to attend. He had hoped, he had a conflict for the second half of the meeting, had hoped to attend the first half, and called me right before the meeting that he had something come up with the parole board, so he is unable to join us. So that really is the extent of the reports at this point, Joe.
Bob, just for a point of reference, especially for those for whom emails bounce back and they may not have received all the information, could you just review real briefly, particularly the documents that were sent out in preparation for this meeting? Could you just review what those were for everyone?
Yes, definitely. So what you all, some of you got, and some of you got links to, and some of you didn't get it all, included the minutes, obviously, as Joe has referenced. So you should have received the minutes. You should also have received some information from our comprehensive plan. One of those looks sort of like this, like this, if you can see it. It's multiple pages that deal with it's the executive summary of the comprehensive plan, and most significantly, it has language in there related to interwoven equity and what the city's focus on equity is as a part of the comprehensive plan. There is also a separate section in the actual document that's floating around right now with the comprehensive plan, which is 3 or 4 pages that deal with the specific objectives and policies and action items around equity also. Just as a side note, the equity advisory board that the council is going to establish on Monday is actually going to be charged with leading the implementation of those items. So those were 2 of the items that were in there. And I'm going to come back to equity again in a few moments. And then there was also a copy of about a 24-page document that has this, it starts off with this community conversations piece. And what these are, and this is again up on the website as well, the council members held a series of focus group meetings back in May to kind of gauge in the same sectors we're using for this where folks were. How are small businesses doing? How is hospitality doing? How are nonprofits doing? And so on. And it's just good kind of background information to help everyone sort of see some of the conversations that have even preceded these conversations. And then there was a link to a new program that was announced 2 days ago, I think, by the governor dealing with rent and mortgage assistance, and it's part of an eviction avoidance program. And locally, TAP is administering that program. I don't know the dollar amounts yet because I don't think they've actually identified that piece of it. So that link was on there as well, just so you had that information. I believe those were all the items, Joe.
Thank you, Bob. And I will also reiterate that when you have an opportunity to look at the minutes, there is a very helpful summary of the different sources of COVID-19 relief funding that we will be, that really are the heart of our conversations and recommendations we'll have on how to equitably distribute that throughout the city as part of our recovery and resilience. So thanks to Bob. I'm not sure who took the minutes, but they were really well done. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. You're quite welcome. Right. And also, Joe, for the group, so that you all know, after this meeting, I'll also be sending out another piece of information, which yesterday there was some additional guidance provided regarding CARES funding, the CARES Act funding. If you remember, at the last meeting, I provided you with some guidance that was created, I think, back in April, and they just issued another round of guidance, and so that will come out also. It just includes another series of FAQs and their responses to it. Most notably in there is they've clarified the ability to use CARES funding for like tourism marketing, for example. That's one of the items. So they've actually had several items in there. So that'll be something else that'll go out to you all just to kind of continue to add some clarity as to what is allowed with the funding. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. All right. Karen said she couldn't find the community conversation, so I just posted the link in the chat box. And Bethany, your question, will the items be sent out again for those of us who did not receive them? We will make every effort to do so, Bethany. A number of the emails bounced back because the size of the documents was too great for some of the email addresses to receive. So we will make an effort to send those out, maybe in smaller doses.
I think Bethany, what I'll end up doing is I'll send, they're all links to something. So I'll just send the links rather than the documents themselves.
Sounds good. All right, our next item is unfinished business. Bob, do we have any unfinished business?
No, all I was going to do was what we just did actually, which was for anyone that was unable to join us at the last meeting, just to give a little bit of clarity as to what we talked about, which that's all in the minutes. The only thing I'll add to it again, and most of you were here last time, so for anyone that wasn't here last time, I'll just clarify that the reason which we are moving at the pace that we're moving at, which is pretty quick, is because on July 20th, we'll be making recommendations to council, and that's because the majority of the funding we have access to has to actually be spent by the end of the calendar year. And so that's what's driving really the push for us to be able to move rapidly. So there's other information that if someone who was not a participant in the last meeting needs to learn more about anything else they see, they certainly can reach out to me directly. But really, that was the only kind of unfinished business. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item 5, which is new business, which is really the heart of our conversation today. Discussion of initiatives for the city of Roanoke related to COVID-19 funding. And Bob, do you want to, I know we, in the email that was sent out, there were 2 guiding questions that we're going to invite everybody to share on in a minute. But before we do that, Bob, is there other guidance you'd like to give us as we move into this time?
Yeah, let me, I'll share with you a couple of items, and then I'm going to briefly go through some logistics that we're going to use in order to answer the questions that we send out. So let me give you a few pieces. I'm going to specifically focus on the equity piece. If you remember, for those of you that were here, and again, most of you were at the last meeting, but in case you were not, what we indicated that was going to be a cornerstone of this effort was ensuring that as we identify priority funding or priority programs to use the funding for and initiatives to use it for, that would be done, one, to support the recovery, obviously, two, to make the community ongoing more resilient to these kinds of shocks as we go forward, and that three, all of that would be done through the lens of equity. And a couple of folks responded afterwards saying, well, they wanted to be certain that everybody was working with kind of the same foundation of equity. And so that was part of the reason to send out to you all the two documents that we have tied with interwoven equity that come from the comprehensive plan. And so let me read from the comprehensive plan just so you know, the plan is really, this is where we want to be as a community by the year 2040. And then it lays out the 20 years worth of steps that are appropriate and necessary to do that. So I'm just going to read a section from this, and then I've got a graphic we'll move to. But Roanoke is both a diverse and an inclusive community with access and opportunities available to all, including education, housing, healthcare, employment, and quality of life. Roanoke recognizes how these opportunities are interconnected and how past actions created barriers that limited opportunity for underserved communities, particularly the African American community, and eroded trust in its institutions. To maintain a high level of interwoven equity, inclusion, the community is engaged continuously to identify and predict changes that could become opportunities or barriers, and to adapt appropriately to those changes. That's the language in the comprehensive plan, and then there's a series of actions that are in there as well that follow. Another kind of definition that is a way in which to think of equity is one. If you think, for example, I'll highlight racial equity just as a part of this, which is eliminating any race-based disparities so that race can no longer be used to predict success. And if you expand that out such that it should include, as it will for us, not only race not making that determination, but gender, identity, sexual orientation, and ability. You can add all of those into that mix as well. That, again, the success or the opportunity for success will not be defined by any of those particular attributes. And I want to ask Tiffany to share, and a lot of you have seen this graphic before, but I think these graphics, they were used in the comprehensive plan, but also help illustrate really the purpose or the meaning of the definition with equity. A lot of folks associate that with equality. When you hear the sort of phrases saying that, well, I treat everyone the same. Well, the problem is not everyone starts in the same place, same assets or the same opportunities. And so when folks are provided the same, you end up with what is at the top of the screen on the left, which is still inequity. And in some cases, some folks actually need a bit more help than might others. And that is the image that's on the right. And again, the same image is replicated, and the image that's on the bottom is actually the one that was used in the comprehensive plan, which again further illustrates that, in order to achieve, if you gave everybody the exact same kind of bike, then you have treated them equally, but you certainly have not offered them equitable resolutions to their transportation needs because they all are not in need of the same thing. And the equity slide, or the image on the bottom, shows how if you adapt in this case, the bike to the needs of the individual, then you can arrive at that equity so everyone has the same opportunity. So those are just two graphics that we've used in the past to kind of help illustrate what we mean in terms of equity. And we can certainly continue to provide more information as we go forward, but that's the objective. And you heard us use as an example at the last meeting. That's why when we talk about things like, let's say, grants for businesses, that if we were to come out and say, well, as long as we give everyone the exact same grant, then we're being equitable. And in actuality, that's just providing an equal amount of funding. But there are some businesses, for a variety of reasons, that actually may need more resources than another needs. And that would be a more equitable solution. And that's just an example of how equity would get infused with this conversation that we're having as we go forward and stuff as well. And again, happy to talk about that more as we work our way through the process. But I appreciate those that had highlighted that we may want to make certain that everybody understands kind of where we're starting from as a community as we go forward. So So that was, I wanted to share that piece of it. I've already mentioned to you regarding that there's additional information coming out about FAQs on the CARES funding. So now let me transition to logistics. So the two questions, which really is a two-part single question that I sent out to you all in the email, which gotta find, I have it. I'm looking through my notes here because I have the question. I just need to find out what I did with it. Yeah, so the question was, as you and your organization or business, so again, most of you are here representing some type of organization or business perspective. A few of you are on here as citizens, but you all bring some kind of experience that is related to the needs that are in front of the community. So kind of keep that in mind that you're bringing that perspective. But as you, your organization or business, or others similar to yours, look ahead toward recovering from the impacts of COVID, what 2 to 3 significant issues or concerns do you foresee? I think Elda mentioned these are your pinch points. You know, where do you feel the pain? Where do you see the pain being felt as you, your organizations, businesses, or others like you try to recover from COVID? And then therefore, what programs or initiatives might help overcome those issues or concerns? The intent of asking this two-part question is really to stimulate kind of broader thinking about the kinds of initiatives, and goes back to a couple of you had asked last time about, well, what's the outcome? Well, this actually will help us define what that outcome is, because you all are helping us from your perspective to say, this is where the pain point is, and this is why these kinds of programs or initiatives would address those pain points. So that question will guide what we're going to do next. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to, if this works, we're going to actually send all of you into breakout rooms. So there is a total of 5 breakout rooms that you're going to end up in. We've intentionally grouped you from more or less from the perspectives that you were appointed to represent. So for example, there will be a room set up that has folks in it from healthcare and nonprofits. So if you were appointed representing that perspective, you're going to get sent into those rooms. And if you're a citizen, or if you're one of the special interest appointments, you've been sent into rooms as well as you go along. I mean, I think the title of the room will show up in there. There is a staff person that will pop into each one of those rooms as well. And basically their only job is really just to keep the conversation flowing, just to make certain that everyone has an opportunity to speak as they go about the answering of the question. We will also, though, need someone in each group, different than the staff person, someone in each group who is willing to take notes and then report back out when we come back together in the larger group what the group discussed. So as soon as you go into that room, someone needs to volunteer to be that note taker and willing to report out when you come back out of that room. And again, the staff person is there just to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to actually engage in the conversation, answering that two-part question again. And I'll read it again before we break out. Once you're in the room, and I think what should happen is, for those of you that have joined with a video and you've got the video on, or even if you've joined in through Zoom and you're using other than your phone, you should see a dialog box pop up asking to go into that room, and you'll need to say yes, you want to go into that room, and then you'll appear in that room. As we approach the last 60 seconds or so while you're in that room, a dialog box will pop up on your screen saying it's going to close in 60 seconds. And when it hits that 0, for those of you that have done this before, you will leave that room. There is no grace period. You will get sent straight over mid-sentence, right over into the main room. There are some of you that will stay in the main room, and there's nothing you have to do. You'll just continue to be in that main room. Once you're over in the breakout room, you'll have 30 minutes. So basically, it's a 30-minute conversation around that two-part question. Then we'll come back, ask each group to report out what it is that they talked about and the ideas that they generated. And then we'll ask, then what we'll do is we'll broaden that to a full conversation that everyone will then participate in based off of what they heard as we go along. So any questions about logistics with that? And
Bob, just one question. I'm not sure how many people we have that are calling in by phone. Will they have access to one of these breakout rooms, or will they stay in the main room?
we think that they should get transferred automatically over into the breakout room, but we're going to find out. If
Okay.
not, they'll end up in the main room, and we'll figure out how to have that conversation with that
Okay.
group. We believe that should be the case.
And just as a reminder to people who are on the phone, to unmute, you just need to press *6. That should unmute you, and you should be able to speak at that point.
Yeah, and Angie O'Brien, you've joined us, right? Let's see if she unmutes. Angie, you on there?
She turned her audio off.
Should be on, okay. I was just gonna give her fair warning because I just included her this morning, so she doesn't even know that she's being sent over into the room, so. So hopefully if Angie's there and she can hear us, then she's gonna end up in a room. And again, really her job is just to kind of help move the conversation along and stuff as well. So one more time, I'll read the question that everyone is working on. So as your organization or business and those similar to yours look ahead toward recovering from the impacts of COVID, what 2 to 3 significant issues or concerns do you foresee? And what programs or initiatives might help overcome those issues or concerns? And, at this point, this is really brainstorming. So not looking for long kind of in-depth answers at this point. It's really just kind of top of mind thing, go through the conversation. If for some reason something happens and you don't get into a room or whatever it is, kind of thing, if you'll email us, and in 30 minutes you'll probably pop back in and stuff as well. But so if everybody's ready, we're gonna attempt to shift everyone. So
You ready? All right, here we go. Opening all rooms. See. All right, there goes everybody. Everybody goes away.
all right, that means I got
Oh, I think it worked. Oh, let me give Angie a room. Angie's going to outdoor. And let's see, Bethany was staying with us. Brent was staying with us. Landon, you are going to stand by, Landon. You are being whisked away to hospitality and entertainment.
Yeah,
So
Landon needs to be in that group.
here you go to yours.
Sorry guys, I'm moving rooms here. So
Colleen, you are going to hospitality and entertainment too, so stand by. Hospitality and entertainment. Jarrell, you are going to education. Jana's staying with us, Elda's with us, Brent, Bethany. Oh, I think it worked. Oh, woo!
Is anybody else?
It's a win.
Yeah.
I think
Oh, that was great, Tiffany.
been in chats before where they poof you away, and then it's just. But we had not done it yet, so when we
Yeah, hopefully they made it to their rooms and they're not completely off the call.
I feel like we're in Star Trek and we beamed people to a different planet.
Yeah, Scotty.
Hey, that's what I was telling Bob, because we didn't get a chance to test it at all. So you guys were our total guinea pigs. So, okay. So you guys were staying. Mignon was going to be in this group, and she wasn't able to make the call. And Mayor Lee wasn't able to be on with us. So this me and Dan, Brent. And I'm happy to take notes, but this is y'all's thing. So I'm happy to be the note taker. So I will defer this to y'all for the conversation.
Thanks.
Well, we don't have a lot of time, so I guess I'll jump in and about my concern, which is I'm concerned that we're not seeing enough long-term planning, but we really can't with this grant. It has to be spent by the end of the year. And also as a grant project administrator, I can say that this funding will have a really unusually fast turnaround. So I think it would be best spent on already existing programs that are ready to go.
Mhm. Is there, Jen, to what you just said, is there some sort of, I think I asked the vice mayor about this. Do we have some sort of flow chart, some kind of visual that we can see by area or group, what organizations are already working on different areas, and what partners are already there? I'm thinking, Abby Verdillo will of course be key in helping us map something like that. But do we have something like that already, or is it something we can start producing?
Well, typically with situations like this, it has to be done as a fair process. So they would be putting out what's called a request for proposals, and then any organization can apply for funds. I do happen to know already that TAP already has a program that is underfunded that provides rent relief, and that CHIP has a program that just ran out of funding that was
Mhm.
buying meals from restaurants and giving them to people that needed meals. So those are two collaborative efforts that are out there already doing stuff that's set up that could do more if they have more money. But, that's just things that I know about. There's bound to be others.
Mm-hmm.
So if this were to go, if some of these funds were to go into grants, would those grant dollars need to be out by the end of the year? Is that correct? That even if we put them into grant funds, assign them to grant funds, those applications would have to be in and grant dollars assigned by the end of the year?
They would have to be spent by the end of the year. So for example, if they gave me money to do a grant project, I would have to complete the project and spend all the money by the end of the year.
Yikes, okay.
Mm-hmm.
By the time this actually works, I'm guessing that the RFP would be going out maybe at the earliest the beginning of August. In the programs, what with everything getting it approved and all, would be probably starting at the earliest around September 1st, which would not give places much time, I guess 4 months to use up the money.
Yeah. I'm thinking, Jan, you said existing programs. I'm also thinking about Bradley Free Clinic that provides a lot of services to those
Right,
needs.
that's an existing program.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking of maybe, is there anyone on the task force that represents Bradley Free Clinic?
I thought somebody did. I do know that Abby, who's with United Way, is sort of supervising the CHIP collaborative, of which Bradley Free Clinic is a part. But as I say, the RFP would almost have to be offered to everybody, which would include Bradley. However, it certainly wouldn't hurt for any or all of us to reach out to people we know in organizations that might be interested and let them know that this is on the pipeline so that they can get ready to request funds, because it'll be a really fast turnaround. And when I say that, usually you have about 3 months to get your program together and get all the details before your grant application is due. In this case, it's probably going to be a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder if I could,
Go ahead, Brent, sorry.
I was going to interject a little bit. I think we might be veering off into about the infrastructure for distribution of funds, of which, obviously I think an existing program would be a good fit. But I think, we're back, I'll use and I'm just trying to steer, I'm one of the staff people in this, that, was talking about what are the pain points, in Bradley Free Clinic, that might work if one of the prioritized pain points is, healthcare during this time. So I don't think the intention was to start with the ease of distribution, because I think that's what, like myself and Dan's office, we're here to run a little interference to make, and help find the proper legal effective distribution for all of this. So I think the intention in this, at least this first section, was to look at those pain points. What areas do we need to look at?
Mhm.
And then talk about programs.
Gotcha. I'm here representing a couple of organizations. One is a Tree Planted, which is a mental health organization. I'm a licensed counselor, and so that's usually my lens. And the other is Roanoke Refugee Partnership, and so obviously I'm seeing things from those in poverty and those who don't really have access to needed services, especially mental health services. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind is mental health access, which has been a problem for a really long time. When I think about that in terms of COVID relief, I think about how few counselors there are for how many people that are going to need mental health services. It's predicted that there's going to be a major mental health fallout because of trauma experienced by this, and access to mental health is going to be vital. And so I recognize the barriers that are already in existence for people, but I think that's going to be greater over time. And so I think mental health access, especially for people in poverty who can't afford counselors, but also relief funds for counselors, maybe hiring counselors in different positions, for example, maybe to work with law enforcement, or maybe to work in places where that might be helpful to mitigate different processes for people. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Mhm.
The other, when I think about refugees and immigrants, I think about interpretation, which is extremely expensive, very difficult to access. And language is the #1 barrier to services for people who speak a second language. And Roanoke is a very diverse area, and a lot of people don't have access or find it very difficult to access needed services across the board because of the language barrier. So funding for interpreter services.
Mhm. I'd like to go back to what I said at the beginning, that idea of having some sort of mapping of organizations and what they're doing. I think it would be a big issue, a big problem if we just say, well, let's just, spread the word, let people know, organizations we know, that there's these monies or grants or however that infrastructure goes out to be. I think that defeats the purpose of the equity component in here. So I think it would be, my concern is, that the people or the organizations that are not within our little constellations get left out. And so I think it's important for the group to be able to provide something, just like what Bethany did. I represent these 2 organizations, and these are kind of like the problems that branch out from these organizations, right? And then to really tap into the expertise of some of the people in the group. Again, of course, Abby comes to everybody's mind, but something like a Joyce, people who really work with a number of, whether it's businesses or nonprofits, et cetera, managing projects, et cetera, who can then help us identify, if Bethany has expressed her concern with interpretation services, right? Who are the 3-4 businesses in the area who can provide this, or who are people already using? So something where we can definitely incorporate everybody's, networks and constellations to make sure that all needs are being addressed, and not just the needs of Chip, because Chip is down the street from my office, or I've worked with Chip before. So that's one of, I think, for me, that's a big pain point, right? That we accidentally leave out or omit certain groups, certain geographies of the city, because we're all working downtown. So we know Chip, and we know TAP, and we know the United Way. So we need to make sure that we have a map of organizations who are working in different areas. Some of them cover many things, like, for example, again, Bethany, you probably have a cross section, just to use you since you shared your work already, a cross section of mental health with the refugees that you work with, right? And then what goes in there, language translation. I'm sure when we look at small business, when we look at the arts, we're also going to see something like a need for language translation in there as well. So something that allows us to see everything, big picture, but allows us to make the connections of how different agencies and groups and businesses already work in the Valley, so that, a call for grants, for funding is more coherent and equitable.
Elder, right along with that, I'm thinking community collaborations. That's it, and it starts with understanding what everyone does, services that they provide, and access to those services become easier. But when I think about building community resilience, because I think that's where I always go during this conversation is about how do we build resilience for our whole community. I think a lot of that is going to be with the collaborations between people, because I think for all the incredible services that Roanoke has within it, I mean, we have a wealth of services that are provided for people, but we sort of work in these silos. Like you said, like I work downtown, so I understand the things that are downtown, and there are incredible services all throughout the city. And so finding ways, creating that constellation map, finding ways to create those community collaborations helps build community resilience too.
It is a big problem, but it's not, unfortunately, something that we can solve that quickly. And I know this because some of my collaboratives have been concerned about it for years. I would like to see the Virginia 911 expanded and funded more, because it's already there, it's set up, it already does that. But frankly, there is so much going on and so many services that nobody can keep track of all of it. So even that has its faults, but I think it could be certainly improved to be something where you can just type in something like translation and get everybody who has a connection with that. But I mean, even going on that, well, my organization has solved the translation problem. We use a service that's inexpensive, but it's not in our 211 listing. I don't have every freaking thing that everybody knows in our whole organization in there. So yeah, it's an issue.
I'll jump in with another pain point that I have is, and I think it kind of ties back to having this idea of a map of what is out there, what people are doing, and how people are collaborating already, so we're not reinventing the wheel. I'm concerned with the reopening and the possible closing and the possible reopening again. I'm sure we're all up to speed on the news from this week, which are a bit disheartening as we enter phase 3 in the Commonwealth, and in our area seems to be the only area that's upticking instead of downticking. So my concern is, what kind of sort of like second layer network can we fall back on when organizations, businesses who are, going out with initiatives have to suddenly stop and have to restart. I know that's an issue that I face in my business, as we look into how do we, restart things, we also have to look ahead and have a plan B for what happens if we have to close down again. And I see, Tamia, you just joined the call, and I know this is probably something that you have expertise or probably thinking about as well. As you reopen things, how do we create network safety nets in case things have to be slowed down, closed down again, and then reopened again, so that we're not focusing all the energy and dollars into the reopening without thinking, I think, in a logical manner, that there might be situations where we have to shut down to some degree, hopefully not fully.
And I'm actually trying to send her to small business.
Okay.
But she could still chime in, because right now poor Joyce is in a room by herself.
Really?
Are you able to see where I asked you to move to a room? I don't know if it's something, I don't know if you're on the phone or if you're through Zoom.
I was in the call with Joyce, and then she wanted to answer the questions, and she went to a chat box, and I thought I could go there as well, and I got bumped out. So I went back to the original email and jumped in. But to Elda's question, we are operating fully. We are busy, and we are constantly reminding employees about the social distancing, about the hand washing. We have one employee that goes through the whole shop, each department, and wipes everything down every day. Every employee has all the equipment that they need and supplies to wipe down their own departments. We don't have anyone coming in unless we have a conference, and we do social distancing. But my biggest concern is the legal aspect of it. Can I legally tell my employees that if you leave Roanoke Valley, you've got to check in and we're going to take your temperature every day? Can I legally say you're obligated and required to let us know if anyone in your family has gotten tested and is positive? I'm walking on the legal aspect of what can I do and what can't I do, because I heard from the VMA on Monday that there's a big push in Virginia to make workers' comp part of COVID, which is totally against anything in my realm that is acceptable. It's just, if it's COVID now, what's it going to be next? And as a business owner, I spend a lot of money on workers' comp, and that scares the bees out of me.
Tamia, I'm going to go sort of make a bold jump here, and I think you joining this group accidentally has been perfect for something that I was hoping to illustrate. So when I say, if we need to map out things, here's a perfect example. So Tamia is a business owner. I'm a business owner. Tamia's business is my client. Tamia's employees are some of the people that benefit from the services that Bethany runs, knows about, are people who benefit from, say, a Bradley Free Clinic, from CHIP as well. And so, seeing these three voices here, I think it illustrates how just even within the group, we already know some of how these wheels are operating, right? And so when we think of the Bradley Free Clinic, it's coming from these three angles where, our cultural intelligence interpretation services fits, with Tamia's work, with Bethany's work, and it branches out there. And so we need to see that interconnectedness again to see where those services are being offered and used as they are already impacting, for example, here, small business, mental health services, refugee services, and all those ancillaries that go together.
We are all connected.
Mm-hmm.
We're all connected. And that's why I'm very disappointed that there's not a map. I mean, I just joined the task force thinking that someone had all this organized so we could at least see how it works. But you just put together a perfect illustration for me that
Mm-hmm.
my employees do go to Bradley.
Mm-hmm.
We use your services in our business and we depend on you. So why can't we put this in black and white as what services provide services to the citizens of the city, and make a map of it so that we can understand and make sure that the money is getting spent by December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
I personally am, I don't know any manufacturers that are in distress in the area, but I'm not out. I'm on the shop floor. Mm-hmm. I'm working side by side with my employees. So I haven't had the opportunity to raise my head up and see what other businesses are doing. Joyce Waugh, she and I were in the room together. We were just on the cusp of talking about what other businesses were doing in the state.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's, when we bring it down to that sort of micro granular level, as you just mentioned, Tamia, that's exactly what it's all about. The citizens of the city and what services they need and how we can look at it from a bigger perspective, from that map, to see, where those services are already being offered or there's already an infrastructure for those services, so that when there's the monies, for example, again, going back to Jan's point of, here's some grants, so we know we can contact these people in an equitable fashion and say, these grants are available via these funds for these purposes, and all that good information, right? But, we can talk about there are the macro problems of businesses, but it's those employees in the businesses who kind of cross all those stratospheres. It goes back to the education of the kids. It goes back to the healthcare. It goes back to, I think, to me, something you brought up right now I hadn't thought of, which is legal counsel for businesses, especially for small businesses, right? And then that, once again, interconnects things like what Bethany was saying of the need for translation, right? If you have small business owners, say on Williamson Road, they might need the linguistic and cultural translation of what this is, what the offer is, what the plan is. So I think you made a great point, Tamia.
Thank you.
I don't see, though, that this networking, I guess we could make that something that we'd like to request the funding for, but since it has to be spent by the 31st, I don't see how it could actually help for places that by the time this opens up on, say, September 1st for them to use it. But yeah, networking is a good idea. I just don't see it as particularly a COVID-19 recovery thing, but maybe it is.
I don't think it's networking, Jen. I think it's more what I'm saying and what I'm understanding Tamia is saying as well is an idea of, in this group, in this task force, a lot of us know each other, or at least, personally, professionally, or just by name. Like I knew of Bethany. I hadn't really met Bethany until now. I just met Brent through another board. And I think it would be helpful for me and for all of us to just know exactly where we all are in terms of, the organizations we work with, the businesses, those interests that we're representing, and see how those are interconnected already, to be able to, in an equitable fashion, once the funds are ready to be distributed, whatever that form takes of the structure, right, to get that word out, to get the money where it needs to go. I don't think it's a matter of networking.
So you're talking about you just want this information for all the task force members then?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's, if, in the line of work that I do, right, there might be other people in this task force that have the same needs or might have the same goals or might benefit from, hey, have you thought of working with X organization, or, have you worked out on Williamson Road? You need to contact, the Williamson Road Business Association, even folks at Hotel Roanoke, some of what they're doing, their employees are probably coming from there.
Well,
So,
that sounds like an easy fix. We'll just ask Bob Cowell to get that information from everybody on the task force and distribute it. So
right.
Now it's other concerns that I have because I was looking at projects that can be done aside from the tenant issue, which I think is an easy fix. We just give more money to tenant relief, but the huge problem that I can't figure out how to solve is there are 3,000 to 4,000 school-age kids in Roanoke who, looking at the most recently discussed Roanoke City School Plan, they're going to need some sort of supervision at home because the schools won't be able to accommodate them. Now, some of the ideas include opening up unused school buildings, so that could be done with school funds, but some of this I think is a small business problem. There are small businesses, for example, that had to close during COVID-19 who provided childcare. So I'd like to look at that as an issue, maybe using some funds to help childcare agencies or even people at home offering childcare, because people are not going to be able to get back to work or run their small businesses or do anything if they have to stay home with their kids.
And looking from the child perspective too, that, if kids are at daycare, then they're not getting their schoolwork done, not from low income families. And there are going to be a lot of kids at home who are just taking care of themselves, whether that's, like right or wrong or legal or whatever you want to call it. That's the reality of the situation for so many families in Roanoke, is that, there are going to be children at home, not able to do their schoolwork and not having another place to go if there aren't enough childcare options. And I mean, I do wish that we had more time to spend these funds in order to create some sort of program. And that's something to put out there just anyway for the future if funds do become available, because I believe there needs to be some sort of community resilience program that has to do with childcare and includes community collaborations like with the Taubman and, you know, organizations who are already have these incredible programs for children in creating some sort of learning environment and not just, you know, normal childcare, somewhere where they can actually get their work done. Because right now, so many places are closed that they can't exactly go to the library, or, you know, we don't know what phase we're going to go into and back away from, and if those library spaces or other learning spaces are going to be available to them. So that's a major concern for me too.
I'd like to hear more from Brent. I'm afraid that we've sort of talked over him.
No, and I appreciate that. And I am my mother's child, and I have lots of opinions. But I'm supporting Bob and the staff in this. You know, as the new assistant city manager of community development. You know, obviously this task force was looked at a huge element of our current community development. So I'm offering support, and I'll occasionally I might shoot an opinion in there just for the common man. But I'm here to hear what you guys have to say and help run interference as we try to implement this and spend this funds. So thank you anyway.
So Brent, what technically is our group here? I haven't figured out what our group is.
Which one?
Is it special interest or?
I don't know either, because I wasn't really told about the rooms either. But I think what we've done so far, what I think we asked, find those pinch points to throw out there, and and we just think, and then what we do, I guess, is decide where that, and then we go into those already made systems, those already set priorities and things. I would like to comment on the map of things that I've worked in the area coordinating some of the human service funding for Roanoke County for a long time. And when you say that, I think there's been attempts to do that. When you really think about it, and as I think Jan said, that we do have some listing, social services will have, some information. It's just, has that been put in a format and made access to? Probably not. But what you'll find is there'll be a lot more when you start putting them together. There's really a lot of, and I think from a governmental standpoint that's been around this for a while, you'll get into the discussion sometime when you do that of overlapping and duplication of services. And that might derail what we're looking for now, but I think it's a good idea, and a lot of that information exists, and we'll look at, if this group asks, we'll have Bob direct staff to see what we have put together, and at least be some working documentation for you going forward.
That would be fantastic. And again, sort of similar to what Bob did today, when he showed those graphics about equality versus equity. I think having the visual component, whether it's a map, a flow chart, something where we can see that everybody can visually see the progression. I think that is very, very helpful for people to especially such a big group that we all kind of grasp around the topics and areas we're talking about. So that would be great, Brent. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to have contact information for everybody too, so I can get with Bethany, for example, and tell her what translation stuff we use, because it might work for her, or she might have a better idea for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe Jan, maybe each member of the task force can prepare like a small blurb, like a presentation card. Here's my name, the contact information, and like the 2 or 3 businesses, organizations you represent, or services you provide, or folks who your folks that you serve are.
Mm-hmm. So Bethany,
is Tiffany listed?
Pardon?
Tiffany, does a roster exist for this group?
Yes, I actually made one today.
Oh, excellent. So there's your start.
Yeah.
Thank you for volunteering, Tiffany, to get that together.
I got everybody. I made this into an Excel spreadsheet because we had it in another version, and this will be so much easier. So I can work with Bob on making that, or if, there is some type of form or whatever we think we need to do to make it easier for people to say, hey, yeah, this is my organization, but this is who we partner with a lot. Because I know my background's fire EMS, and I did all our outreach, and we partnered with everybody.
Right.
That's kind of how it is, and that's how you would get your messages out.
Bethany,
Mhm.
if you could rally people around you to help you write a proposal to get some of these funds, what would you use, let's just say $300,000 for, that would be spent for the end of the year?
If it were $300,000, I can just tell you sort of my dream, which is eliminating mental health barriers. And so I think that might look like creating a voucher system, and so getting mental health services, different mental health services in a listing, like a referral service, and then partner with someone like Bradley Free Clinic, where a lot of people go who struggle to find services, and they have, or a family service of the Roanoke Valley, and they have vouchers that are paid for by these funds. So when people come and need mental health services, but they don't have the capacity to serve them, excuse me, they can then take one of these vouchers out to one of the referrals in the area and already have those services paid for. That's what I would like to see, some sort of trauma resilience. Another option when I'm thinking about building community resilience is creating community programs, especially for the coming school year, right? So it doesn't have to be a long-term, I'm going to need grant funds to keep this going next year. But because I think of like kids who go to summer camp one year, and it can be a life-changing experience, even though it's a few months long, right? I think we have to build some sort of bridge of community resilience, especially among kids who are sitting at home, who don't have access to any sort of services. So I would love to see some sort of like collaboration. I mentioned the Taubman earlier, who provides a lot of different services, but people have barriers of getting there. So I would think about some of those programs too that would help fix the childcare issue, but also, have programs about mental health and learning. So it would help fix some of the being in school part of it. So they would have space and time to do their schoolwork and have people there for that one-on-one, maybe interpreters there too, to help with that, to help eliminate some of those barriers.
So I heard you say 3 different programs, really, so you'd need more than $300,000.
Sure. Those are just my, yeah, I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware that I want a lot of money.
And to build on something that Bethany said with childcare centers, if a lot of these things for children, if it's reopening or expanding on current things, they could qualify for social services vouchers from the state to continue the services. So one of the big problems with these short-term funds is what do you do when the money runs out? But childcare specifically, if it's a licensed facility, can get additional funding once they've started up. But some of this, as I said, might be also covered by the similar funding, but bigger amount of funding that's going to the Department of Education. So it might not have to come out of our funds.
Mm-hmm. I have one last pain point. I want to make sure that we get it down, because speaking of the reopening and getting back out and getting folks out in safe manners and ways, cleaning, everything that's cleaning and sort of everyday citizen PPE is expensive. That's a huge expense for a business, a huge expense for a nonprofit, for any organization. I can imagine what that bill is going to look like for the city school. So sort of, the nitty gritty, if you will, logistics of it is, not just to educate folks on, hey, wear your mask, but, will you have masks available for people who, are not able to afford it, forget it? There's breaks, that happened to me. Mine broke in the middle of something and I freaked out and have an extra one. So, if we're seeing things like that, and the clean component, and then along with it, testing, which goes back to something Tamia mentioned as well. Not just, what are the legalities of requiring the testing, but testing it can be tricky and it can be expensive depending on how you're doing it. So I think we need to, somehow put an asterisk next to, how to ensure that these funds can also go to whatever, organization, group, et cetera, to help with these very practical costs of cleaning, sanitizing, testing, buying masks, buying gloves. I mean, these are the things that we all think about as we leave our house every day. And in a lot of the communities that I work with, I know they don't use them because they don't have them. They don't have the money to purchase these items. So.
All right, also, I think we're about at our time. For some reason it's not popping up, but I know we've been going for 30 minutes. So I'm going to hit the close room button and we should all move back together. But you guys shouldn't, you guys will just see people pop back in. So cross our fingers it works. Okay, we've got 60 seconds. So you've got 60 seconds to wrap. That's forever in TV time.
Tiffany, I like the way you do it, the way you narrate it. I feel like we're about to get a prize, like
I
here's
know.
a brand new car.
I love you guys. I love you guys' conversation about this because I have a 10-year-old and he's a firefighter, and I work here, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not quite sure what we're gonna do because Botetourt County is going on Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays. So it's gonna be fun. And I don't know how
to be the sergeant in arms here, but one of you guys has to agree to do the recap. We were supposed to do that when we first got into the thing. Forgot. So which one of you guys want to kind of? Tiffany, did you take notes?
I took some notes, but whatever you guys want. I took a bunch of notes.
Okay, I think you were the note taker. Is it going to be Tiffany to recount the notes and let the group comment when it was the area that you brought up?
I'm happy to do that, and then you guys can add in.
Yeah, let's do it that way. We'll ad lib that one. I bet it'll be the best group of the bunch.
Okay.
Brent, that was very smooth, Brent.
You got to tap dance fairly well in this job.
Tiffany,
Tiffany,
kudos. I think it worked.
I was in a group of two, and then I lost Tamia, so I was in a group of one.
Oh, Joyce, did you have a good time talking with yourself?
I did. I mean, actually,
Sorry,
it's a little
Joyce.
breathe.
She joined us for a bit, and we were having trouble getting her scooted back to you, so she gave some good input on our group too. So sorry you were alone, Joyce.
Yeah, one of the challenges was
Well,
to try to figure out.
No one popped in.
We took everyone and put them in the groups, and then we thought, well, if depending on attendance, you might end up in a group of one. But as long as you didn't disagree with anyone, Joyce, you're good, right? So, well, at this point, Joe, Joe, go. Joe, if you would like, if you want to kind of, each group had someone who was responsible for kind of taking the notes. And I think at this point, if you'd like, what I can do, Joe, is identify the group. And then if you want to kind of just help facilitate sort of that conversation. At this point, I think the intent is really just to have the note taker report out. And
right.
What we'll do is once that work is done, then we'll like a different image.
Bob, that sounds great. I need to slip away for a minute.
No problem.
To take just a necessary break. So I will be right back, but if you would like to go ahead and start with the first group, that would be awesome.
We will definitely do that, and I don't have the names of the groups in front of me. So let's start with the one that was involved with healthcare.
Well, that's my group, so I can't leave yet. So can you start with another one?
Start with small business and manufacturing. Whoever was small business and manufacturing, and that might have been Joyce. That was actually your group. So, all right, Joyce, it's all yours.
Okay. All right. So actually, Bob, I sent you, and also I sent you and Joe a copy of information that I got from Amanda Forrester, Small Business Development Center, just to confirm that. But while Tamia was with me, she tried to do something and I think do something with the chat and then she was gone. But anyway, she mentioned, excuse me, 2-3 issues, in recovery. Kind of just the sheer challenge of trying to work in it, not almost kind of predict, not knowing how long this will last, and then how to plan for that. As a manufacturer, they were considered essential. They've had business, but it's not been all fun, of course. And then there's some legal and employee kind of concerns just with the uncertainty and that people in her business 99% is, you can't do that by remote, at least not yet. So but I thought maybe supply chain and some other things would be of issues, but it's more about just trying to figure out and constantly adapt to the changing tides, if you will, of how much has happened. But I sent you and Joe both the information about, and I thought this might be relevant about what some of the problems with small manufacturers are having and seeing, and it really spans the gap, but it also is what they're seeing are some common needs among businesses, and have discovered recently that minority-owned businesses specifically need website assistance. And so they developed a list of Black-owned businesses, and only a handful have websites. So in general, due to COVID, the biggest need is still money to cover monthly expenses. And most of the small businesses spend pretty much everything they earn. So it just puts them in a jam. And so the longer this continues, even with assistance of any kind, that's going to be a problem. And the longer it goes, the less likely they can sustain the business. In addition, a few other concerns have to do with constantly trying to figure out, find at a price what our micro businesses can afford, whether that's marketing strategy and planning, whether it's social media usage and ad spending, bookkeeping services. They spend a lot of time helping them learn QuickBooks and spreadsheets, or setting those up. And of course, they use a lot of advisors for that as well. And assistance with expenses that are associated with hiring. And then also they're struggling to find employees and can't afford some of the traditional marketing efforts. And then there are a few other things, but I think that kind of hits the highlights. But like I said, I emailed that to you, so you have that also for your records. So just if you can shorten this whole pandemic, that would be a really good thing.
Joyce, it's Cynthia. Can SCORE be of help here with providing those services free of charge to some of these businesses?
And SBDC also, as you know, has no charge. There is no charge for their advising and counseling services. And I think it's just a matter of what things have come so fast and furiously that it's just hard. I know that they are connected with SCORE also. For those who may not know, Senior Corps used to be called Senior Corps of Retired Executives. And sometimes it's just a matter of that match. They're essentially additional advisors, if you will. And for someone that needs a longer term kind of working on a project or something, they can be extremely helpful. And it depends on what the categories are and how long they have been, kind of retired versus, what a small business might be in need of. So good idea. I know that they do work with them to the extent that they can.
Thanks, Joyce. Joe, if we want to move to the outdoor recreation group next.
All right, outdoor recreation. Who's the spokesperson for that group?
Carol is, if she's,
Carol, are you with us? Is that Carol Rowlett?
yes.
Yeah. There you go. Welcome, Carol.
If not, I can cover it.
Well, I saw Carol unmute, but I'm not hearing Carol.
It's showing she's there, but
She had to she stepped away a few times. I don't know if she had something going on in the background. She'd come back pretty quickly though. Because she was on video earlier.
do we want to go to another group, or do you want to have Pete do it?
Well, if Carol was anticipating speaking, why don't we go shift to another group and we can come back, and then if we still have the same issue, we'll call on Pete.
All right,
Okay.
why don't we go to education then?
Education. Oh, hold on. There's a note here from Carol. Pete, I'm here, but no one can hear me. Please cover for me. So Pete, take it away.
Okay. You know, we talked about the idea of, you know, outdoor recreation being part of this larger conversation is seeming pretty, you know, small in comparison to what everybody's mentioning. But we do think it's important, you know, as parks and open space are, you know, they're typically afterthoughts, but I think the outdoor component of our regional narrative, it's really important going forward. It's an opportunity for us to, you know, attract businesses and people looking to move out of densely populated areas, tourism, you know, people looking to get into the mountains. So it's our chance to be proactive. So, you know, what we talked about is the areas that have been impacted, you know, per the question that you posed to us was, the impact on our natural resources. You know, the parks have seen anywhere from a 50 to 200% increase in use. So the asset degradation, you know, people are impacting the trails, the greenways, they're being impacted. And we've already seen it pre-COVID. It's only really gotten worse. You know, volunteers haven't been able to get out there to help take care of it. And so one of the ideas we came up with was, well, the high level was, you know, to focus on outdoor infrastructure impact, maintenance impact, so maintenance funding, I guess, if you will. One of the ideas we came up with, though, was to develop a model based on the Civilian Conservation Corps, you know, that built the state parks during the Great Depression. So a way to put unemployed people to work right now, basically working and working on trails and doing park improvements as well was one concept we came up with. Outdoor businesses, you know, they have been impacted. You know, for example, River Rock, the indoor climbing gym, has been closed this entire time, yet they've been paying all their employees, so they've been losing about $25,000 a month. I think anything related to outdoor businesses would be covered by some type of small business grant program, so just ensuring that they're included in that. The other area that we talked about was events and festivals, you know, which have all been canceled. A lot of those are run by small businesses. My organization puts on the Blue Ridge Marathon, which has over $1 million economic impact to the Roanoke community, which hasn't happened. Lots of restaurants, retails, hotels, they rely on these events to bring foot traffic to them. So making sure events and festivals are included in either some type of grant program or some type of, you know, tourism and marketing funds as well. Then we talked about programming from a Parks and Rec standpoint. If there's a way for them to implement COVID-safe programming, you know, via mobile equipment purchases or something like that, that actually allows them to take programming into the neighborhoods, take, you know, programming to different ways that benefits our community, because, you know, the being outside, the vitamin D, you know, both our mental and physical health is really, really important as well. And then the last thing we talked about is if there's a way, we talked about maintenance of infrastructure, but if there's also, the funds could be used to actually improve parks. We actually have a proposal for improving Morningside Park that could probably be implemented by December 30th. So to finish out the build of the bike park at Morningside Park is something that could be done as well. And I think I covered all of those. I covered everything that Carol had written down. Chris or Carol, did I miss anything?
I guess just to emphasize too that since Roanoke is an outdoor city, keeping our parks up and also, you know, taking any kinds of opportunities to bring, like we said, the festivals back would not only benefit the parks, but it would get the economy, back in gear and help the restaurants and downtown and all those other places. So anything that we can do to bring in people to Roanoke this summer when it might be a little bit safer would probably be a good idea, even though, a lot of times, like you said, a lot of times people think, oh, well, Parks and Rec, okay, well, we have more important things to do. But this is what attracts people to Roanoke. So if we can, exploit that benefit that these are parks that people come to enjoy, that if that can also spur on some business and open up some restaurants and hotels and things like that, that would definitely be good.
Thank you, Chris and Pete. I think you gave some really helpful perspectives on why the outdoors is so critical in so many ways. Bob, what's our next group?
Let's go to education.
All right. Who's our spokesperson for education?
That would be me.
All right, Andrea.
Hi, everybody. So I had a really rocking group, and I'm not sure that I scribbled down all of the awesomeness that everybody said, but it looks like we had pretty much two groups representing. We had a couple people representing nonprofits who work with children and families, and then a couple of us are working with Roanoke City Public Schools. So first, Cheryl reported from Feeding Southwest Community Solutions Center, and she talked about being prepared for the next big hit and her concern with keeping people employed. So right now they're continuing with the meal program, but their culinary arts program is on hold. So new students aren't being trained in this program. And her concern is, will there be jobs available for these students if they were to reinstitute the culinary arts program? Would these students be able to find jobs afterwards? So will there be employment for some of the people who go through the Southwest Feeding Solutions Center program? Pamela spoke about for the Youth Advocate Program, which is also a nonprofit, and their emphasis is trying to keep children in the community. They work with social services to do this. They also work with foster care, and they're concerned about increased behavioral issues with children and whether there'll be enough funding for them to be able to meet all the needs of the children who are having significant trauma because of COVID. They have a no reject, no eject program so that everybody who comes to the center who needs help will not be turned away. But the concern again is if without additional funding, will they be able to meet the needs of all these significant behavioral issues that people are having to deal with, particularly children. And then Jarrell, who's the RCPS, Roanoke City Public Schools Guidance Coordinator, had a lot of concerns, which are a lot of us echo. Some of the things he says is he's concerned that kids are having to stay home while their parents work. If we have a model where we're doing complete remote learning, he's concerned that we won't be able to keep our students on course. How are we going to address, their academic needs? How do we know that they're staying on the course and they're being able to continue to grow academically? He's concerned about parents having proper training in terms of the internet and all of the platforms that the teachers are using. He's concerned too about the logistics of the buses and how we're going to continue to provide meals in Roanoke City for Roanoke City Public School students if we're using the buses to transport children, keeping in mind the social distances that we're supposed to keep between the students, which of course we want to keep them safe. So will we be able to provide meals through the bus services and get children to school? He's also particularly concerned about support for ELL students, special ed students, and how accommodations will be made for those students, and how our transitions getting back to school will be addressed. So one of the things for me, I know that one of my concerns is that I know that Roanoke City Public Schools has a budget for COVID response from the CARE Act, and I'm not sure if there's been discussion about what we're working toward in this task force, and if that overlaps in any way with the way that Roanoke City is having discussions about what they are going to do to provide relief for families and for the schools. So I don't know if we're overlapping in our efforts or if there's a way we communicate with Roanoke City Public Schools to see that what their goals are in terms of their allocation of funds. And, you know, do we know that we're not making the same recommendations? I know one of the recommendations we had in our group was the city considering expanding the broadband bandwidth, not considering hotspots so much as some of the other areas have districts because of concern with connectivity. But I don't know if the city's already talking about that. And so do we have somebody who's communicating with the city is a question that we had. And one other thing that came up in our discussion is the need for us to communicate with each other and collaborate with each other. And so would it make sense for us to consider employing people who could be like liaisons between the school system and the city and nonprofits so that, and I'm speaking as a teacher, for teachers, I know that our relationship with our families has changed so much after COVID. You know, we became not only people who were providing instruction or trying to provide some semblance of instruction, but also our relationships have been built to a point where we were like first responders with these families. And so a lot of hidden needs were identified because we were working so closely with families, which weren't the case before when we had a traditional model of you know, students coming to school every day. So a lot of teachers are feeling are concerned because they're identifying needs that the families have and they're not sure what to do in terms of having those needs, getting those needs met. And so teachers I know want to be able to have, get information from the different resources that are available and work together and communicate and collaborate. So I don't know how that would look, but that's an important piece for teachers, I know.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Those are great points. And Bob, I know I'm participating on the one aspect of the Roanoke City Schools Restoration Task Force. And in our subgroup that met this morning, I mentioned the fact that there were like two avenues of funding, Roanoke City Schools as well as Roanoke City, and that we didn't want to duplicate, but we wanted to stay in touch with each other about where we could address gaps through funding. So that's a great point. And Bob, do you want to elaborate any on that in terms of how we're staying in touch with those two streams?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And to be honest, we really haven't had much yet partly because of going through the transition in leadership with the school. So I think now that the superintendent is on board, we'll be able to plug more directly into that because I think it's a really, really important point is that neither side wants to duplicate what the other is doing and ideally actually be able to leverage it so that we can accomplish even more versus just avoiding duplication. But I know Jarrell asked kind of the last time about could we see, kind of what is the city or what's the school thinking about spending their money on? And I know Joe just referenced one of the groups that they have, the working groups. And I think somebody in the group sent to me kind of a correspondence that some of you that are teachers got from, I guess, from the school administration.
That's me.
Okay. And you all know from that, really the school's efforts are just kind of getting underway. And so they haven't yet really created that list, but I do think that plugging in tighter to that is going to be pretty critical with this. So good point, because I think what we want to do is what Jarrell was asking for. You want to have side-by-side lists really and make sure that combined they're dealing with the issues at hand and that there's no unnecessary overlap. So yeah.
Right. Thank you, Andrea, and thanks to your group. That's great insights. Bob, what's our next group?
Let's move to the healthcare and vulnerable population nonprofit.
All right, Karen Pillis.
Hey, all right, I'm sorry. I have so many things on my computer, I can't find anything. So we had a great, robust conversation, and I think we identified some common concerns of all of ours, that small businesses, especially those that are minority owned, have been losing employees due to the economic world, as well as the need for larger, more maybe financially stable organizations to be able to offer employment during this time. So they are very vulnerable financially, and those are businesses that are also typically offer services to our vulnerable populations. Cynthia had a wealth of suggestions, and one of them was a model that is government. There's a government funding for training of an 8-hour training for for CNAs that will enable those people who are unemployed right now to see if it's something they might like, that maybe could really be a driver for our healthcare industries. We talked about nonprofits as a whole, and our fear that while we need to be looking at emergency right now kind of funding, that some of those nonprofits, whether they be arts nonprofits or even family service nonprofits, we don't know. We are anticipating what it's going to look like 6 months, for 8 months, a year from now, when all the funding may go away. And so we would really like a dual kind of funding stream, one to talk about immediate needs, but one also to build in resiliency for those things that might be coming, understanding a lot has to be spent by December 31st. We talked about single points of not only referrals, but single point of information. So if we decide it's going to be 211, or the Roanoke City website, how are we getting our information out? And that we need to be looking at non-traditional communication methods. One suggestion was maybe a social media app that talks about what this group is offering and what the city has going on. And I think that what we kind of determined through our conversation is that the vulnerable populations that maybe we need to, with some intentionality, plan around our seniors and our youth. Joe?
Okay.
What did I miss?
Well, I think that pretty well covered, I mean, the overall spectrum of what we were trying to address. Just to identify some of the initiatives that emerged, which I think will help hone in on some direction. We all pretty much agreed that in terms of this, the resources and the funding mechanism, it would be great to have a single point of contact where people either accessing the funding or the services can come to a single point, that there could be a basic set of questions that everyone could ask, and then we could refer out from there. We talked about leveraging the community health workers, and this is particularly important for people who work in a hospitality industry but have been furloughed or laid off because that particular business, whether healthcare related or not, is not open currently. This came up in a previous conversation, and how this training then gives people access to a different trade that they can move into related to healthcare. We talked about the importance of system navigation, and that is thinking through the lens of this being multi-generational, not just a single generation, that when we talk about broadband access, when we talk about internet access, when we talk about educational components, it's not just for our children and youth, it's also for our seniors who in many cases lack the access they need for telehealth, telemedicine. So we can see how multifaceted it is. We talked about the dynamic of not knowing the known and the unknown. And this is impacting everybody, what we know and what we don't know. And particularly in relationship to the schools, there are many after-school programs that are reimagining what a full care or a full day program might look like. Because if students are only in school, like on site 1 or 2 days a week, and the rest is online, and their parent or parents are needing to work, what is that going to look like? And so there may be a scenario in which we might want to step up and offer funding for these after-school programs that are suddenly becoming full school programs. So that was a big piece. Directing support on the family level, communication, which was already mentioned, traditional and non-traditional. And I guess the last thing was just what Karen alluded to, was that because there is so much unknown right now, that to the degree that we can address funding to recovery, but also address some of the funding to resilience, to some of those unknowns that we're anticipating now, and create that sort of a model that tries to address some of those issues before we even really know what they are. All right, what's the next group?
Next group would be hospitality and arts and culture.
And who is our spokesperson for hospitality, arts, and culture?
I am the spokesperson.
Thank you, Ellen.
So our group met and discussed some of the details. We had Brian Wells with the Hotel Roanoke and Landon. So they had one look, but also we had museum from Rachel and myself, and Tommy also more in the performance area. But what we started out with was Brian talking about how getting folks into the Hotel Roanoke is imperative for the economy of the rest of the groups that we're talking about. And there's a train going by my office, so it might get loud, excuse me. Brian says with the Hotel Roanoke, they are going to be in significant need of some technology that will allow folks to come in safely with electrostatic spraying and scanning devices and the equipment to get folks into the hotel or the conference space, either to spend the night or to be attending meetings throughout the day, which will help everyone downtown improve with their economic opportunities for those folks to be able to travel and mingle amongst the groups. Then Rachel talked about what the Science Museum is doing, and I'm in awe of what they're doing from my standpoint in education at the VMT. The Science Museum is sort of changing everything that their operations as normal and reaching out to solve some of these childcare problems that have been discussed already. They are allowing their space Monday through Friday to be utilized for more intense, like camp type childcare, but engaging activities and not just things that won't have relevance to that student's life, and keeping them on the upward swing of engaging education. So the Science Museum is going to have some unique needs in their past model. They've nodded for people coming and going throughout their day with adults and children alike, but now becoming more camp type organization where they are meeting the needs for the near future of the students in the several, not just Roanoke City, but throughout the whole area. So they've got some technology needs to do that, as well as providing opportunities for the students to and their teachers to do online instruction using the resources at the Science Museum. Tommy Page brought up some fantastic points that we all need to be cognizant of about how the minority opportunities have not been able to reach their typical populations because they didn't have the resources, and they've been shut down. And now the fear is, if this is the new normal, what can they do next? And he brought up the point that we need to capitalize on micro opportunities where maybe an enormous venue or even a smaller venue at the Jeff Center or such, maybe they're not going to be able to operate as normal, but maybe a restaurant has a small space where they can get some folks in to participate with a musician who can come in a small capacity and do some combination of in live concerts, but also streaming. And Tommy, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but he is fearful of, if virtual becomes the new reality for everyone, will folks stop going to these events, whether they're small concerts, medium-sized concerts, or even big festivals, because of the fear of transmission. He's looking at some partnerships that might not have occurred. So that's a cool thing that we can, people who typically in the past didn't work together collaboratively, reaching out, and hopefully we'll have lots more folks recognizing that smaller groups collaborative might be more powerful than people on an island by themselves, and reach some digital opportunities that way. And as we support the Go Outside branding, also make sure that downtown Roanoke is getting the foot traffic, and they're also part of that picture. Shalene mentioned some buckets with the groups, whereas we've got performing arts, and we've got the venues with the performing arts, we've got the museums, but then we've also got Center in the Square and the Jeff Center, which are rental spaces. So those are different buckets. They all have some unique needs. We need to recognize how they're impacted by the school situation, and particularly for this upcoming school year. I know the Jeff Center is continuously working with Roanoke City Arts and Culture, getting the children into different events, and as does Center in the Square, the Mill Mountain Theater, and those groups. So we need to help. Where are they losing their funding, and how can they have collaboration with the schools? And they're going to have to reinvent themselves somehow, but also working with the restaurants and having symbiotic relationships, maybe go to another level than they've done before. One really cool thing that was mentioned was the Carilion has reached out to have the arts culture participants. Some of their interactive opportunities are being viewed during, as people are waiting for appointments in the waiting rooms. So that's been a very good thing that Carilion has reached out to support some of our arts groups that way. Landon with VBR talked about how the significant loss of jobs is such a tremendous impact, and the fact that we need to build back the tourism and get people, outside dollars, coming back into the community, so that that tax revenue gets lifted back up. And he talked about the sustainability of doing that, and moving forwards, there is a $500,000 reopen plan with VBR that they are moving forwards. Catherine Fox is sending out lots of emails about that. We need to make sure that all the organizations have the funding to be safe, so that we can encourage people to come, but not be fearful of the next Myrtle Beach episode. And he did report that we are going to have 22 softball tournaments in the upcoming year, with the first being July 4th. So we will get some outside dollars coming in, and we need to support the Parks and Rec to make sure that people are able to take advantage of our outside activities in our parks going forwards. Bob had took some notes on all of that, and he reiterated some of these in our discussion. He reiterated some of that, and also said I'm not, somebody mentioned this, one of the daunting tasks is that these funds have to be spent as well as reported. I guess Rachel was talking about how it all has to be wrapped up by December. Bob said that the $500,000 that is coming out of the city has a little bit more flexibility, but I think he made a really good point that existing entities such as TAP will be using their expertise to allocate monies to rent and that mortgage grant funding. The Arts Commission will help, VBR will help. So we've got some existing structure that will help get these funds distributed, reported upon, and returned and able to wrap up by the end of December. So Tommy also had mentioned some of the lack of funds that the minority groups had gotten initially. That is because of some not having the relationship with the banks that would help them secure that money as quickly. And Landon, we sort of ended on the conversation, which many of the groups have already reported on, is how we're so concerned about childcare, whether you're a working parent in need of childcare. And this morning in a conversation with Kids Soar, she said, I think I'm quoting correctly, 46 childcare facilities have permanently closed in the area because they weren't able to sustain themselves. So we've got parents who are struggling with that, and then children who are left at loose ends with the not having the organized day, and that leaves them to having significant trauma issues. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Ellen. That was great. Bob, do we have one more to go?
Do one more, and that's whoever was left in the main room.
All right, so I took the notes, but the team is gonna pop in and support me. So, you know, Jan was saying there hasn't really been enough long-term planning, or there's not gonna be enough long-term planning for this funding because it's gonna be such a fast turnaround. So maybe the funding will be best spent on existing programs, and maybe doing Elda said, maybe having a flow chart or a visual of what organizations are already working on. And then we also bridged into that about what everyone on this task force of all the ways that we're intertwined together and how we're working together with that. You know, we talked about working on how other organizations could apply for the funds, and about how some existing organizations already have programs together, like TAP has underfunded programs for rent, CHIP has some things, but we also want to be cognizant that a lot of us know things that happen in downtown, but we want to make sure that we are realizing everything that's through the city. And so we understand again that it's such a tight turnaround for being able to spend the funds. We talked about Bradley Free Clinic. Abby's name got thrown in there for ways of being able to help figure out a lot of stuff with that. We kind of came back to the pain points that we were talking about and how we can find, you know, effective distribution. And we talked about the importance of mental health, and also about interpretation, that language is the #1 barrier to service. And you know, Bethany brought up a lot of that with the organization she's involved in. And we've got to tap into the expertise of each other on this group to incorporate the needs of everyone. And we talked about community collaborations, and then resilience. That same word kept popping up in our group as well, community resilience, since we don't know when the end is in sight for this, and we're not going to be able to solve this quickly. You know, is it something with Virginia 211 expanding, that there are so many services out there, it's hard for us to keep track of everything that is open, and how do we communicate that to the public? Because there's so much information and so many things. Yeah, go to this website or go to this website, but how do we bundle that together to be easy to understand? And then Tamia, when she got kicked out of Joyce's group, she came back and hung out with us for a bit. And she was talking about with jobs, you know, legally asking if anyone's your family's positive for COVID, and travel, and, you know, about workers' comp, and, you know, how that's going to be really hard on businesses as we move through this, and how much those types of things cost. And then again, we talked about that map of interconnectedness between our agencies, and about the macro and micro problems of businesses. But we've got to make sure that we're communicating well, And let's see. And then we, again, the thing that everything's echoing with the kids, you know, about all the kids, like what's going to happen to these kids that now aren't at school, like, you know, are they going to fall behind, or their parents are at school and are at work and they're home alone, and how are we making sure that there's no gaps, and then with all of the trauma that could come with that. And then the community resiliency program, you know, doing something community resilient, and the bridge of resiliency. I liked how, I think it was Bethany came up with that. And then Elda also pointed out the pain points for reopening and getting people out in a safe way, and just the cost of cleaning and PPE for all these businesses. And, you know, that's a whole new budget line that nobody, I think, was expecting, to make sure we've got masks and hand sanitizers, and, you know, just the cleaning supplies and the time it takes to thoroughly clean, and making sure to help our nonprofits and businesses, and also to let our community, you know, feel a little bit more at ease, I guess, as much as any of us can be at ease right now. But did I miss anything? Brent was in the group, and Bethany and Elda and Jan, Tamia.
This is Eldon and Tiffany. That was a fantastic summary of the many things that were brought up. And I think something just to underline everything you've said was the concern for, once the structure is in place on how the monies will be distributed, whether grants for businesses, for nonprofits, et cetera, how to make sure that those offers are done in an equitable fashion, so that we're not just making the offers or bringing people to the table for, say, you know, just call the usual suspects, or the organizations with TAP and CHIP, which do fantastic, need to be part of the availability of funds, and the distribution of funds is as equitable as possible. And so perhaps a mapping of all the organizations and businesses we represent and partake in might be a good visual way to start, so we can see what that would look like. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Tiffany and Elda and everybody. Bob, I think that wraps up kind of our summary statements from each group. Is there anything else you want to address as that part of the meeting before we move on to our announcements and our wrap up for today?
Yeah, just a couple of short things. And one of the things I'll note is Cynthia typed into the text box looking at the Virginia Cooperative Extension as another resource also that can get pulled into this discussion as well. So that'll definitely be something else we put on the list also. Just kind of two questions really for the group as we progress, because I think first, everything you all have provided is great, because what it's allowing us to now start to do is take this giant kind of unwieldy sort of question and begin kind of narrowing it into saying, okay, well, where are the issues we're trying to address? And then therefore, what kinds of initiatives might do that? And that'll generate this list, which will still be way too long, but it's the point at which, okay, now we've got this list, and that allows us over the next couple of meetings to begin to whittle that list down and also start to prioritize. So that'll be kind of the next pieces of this, but that lends itself to two questions. A couple of these you've touched on already in response to this question, but one is that if folks feel like there is some type of data or a piece of information or knowledge from somebody else that is missing in this conversation that you would really think would aid the group, if you'll email that to me, that kind of thought or question or whatever, because we can bring that into the conversation as well. Because we're all working, you know, there's 39 plus people in this room, and that brings a lot of knowledge to the room, but we also know there's stuff outside of this room that's not being brought to bear. So if there's any of those that come to the top of mind, email me and let me know what that might be that would help you, or you think could help the group actually kind of know. You know, Jarrell has mentioned before, again, if we knew what the schools were focused on, that would help us. That's an example of that kind of thing. But there may be other kinds of data or whatever it might be out there as well that would assist. Y'all made reference to kind of this visual sort of representation of who's out in the community doing what already, might be another piece of that. But any of those kinds of things. So that's one piece of it. The other is at the meeting last week when we went through the bylaws, you may recall that a part of this effort includes a public hearing prior to making the recommendations to the council. And the purpose of that is to allow the whole community the opportunity to actually weigh in on what the work of this group is doing. So my question for you all is, that could happen in one of two different ways. One way is you could use that public hearing as a way in which to solicit more ideas for initiatives. So that would be one purpose of it. Or it could be a way to help you prioritize the initiatives that you all have pulled together. And the main reason that that's significant to know the preference with that is that affects the timing of it. Because obviously if it's about idea generation, we have the public hearing sooner rather than later. If it's about prioritizing, we have it a little bit later in the process. So Joe, what I like to kind of get a sense from this group today, really, if there is thought about which of those do they see having the most value of the public hearing? Is it a value mostly to generate new ideas or primarily to prioritize? So kind of like to get some thoughts from folks today on that.
Yeah, if you, and feel free to respond one of two ways. Either if you're more comfortable putting in the chat box your remarks, we keep that chat box record. So we'll have a record of who chimed in there. If you, and I'm trying to navigate both screens here, but if you just want to unmute and speak, that's fine. Or if you want to use the reaction thing to raise your hand, then I'll try and recognize you that way too.
And Tommy's indicated kind of prioritizing. Pam has said prioritizing. Carol has said prioritizing as well. So
and that seems to be,
yeah, kind of nodding your heads would help too. That if do folks feel like that's the value of the public hearing, is really you can generate the list of possibilities. And again, I guarantee at a public hearing, if folks participate in it and you're asking them to prioritize, don't worry, they'll also give you ideas.
Right. That's very true. That's very true.
Joe, do you mind if
Yes.
I step in?
Yeah.
I think maybe it's because I'm knee deep in some phenomenological research right now and I'm thinking about creating themes, but my feeling is that if we ask the public for new ideas, that a lot of it's going to be in alignment with what we're seeing anyway, and we can create some themes and it would help us prioritize. So either way, it's going to be new ideas and prioritization. But I would really like to hear other voices other than what we have here on the task force to sort of add into what we already have, and it might shift some of our thinking too. So I would like to hear some new ideas.
The other thing we can do also is, and we've done this before also, is if we view the public hearing as primarily a way in which to prioritize the ideas, leading up to that, we can generate another mechanism to continue to solicit ideas. We've done that before with pushing out stuff on social media and asking folks to respond via email or some type of survey or those kinds of things. So if the group wants, we could kind of do both of those prior to really the public hearing. We can kind of push stuff out there to try to continue to generate ideas from the community, as well as then using the public hearing for the prioritization, if that makes sense. That may get somewhat at what you're getting at, Bethany, to try to go that approach.
I think that's good, Bob. And I would suggest that as we're inviting people into this conversation community-wide, that if we can consider some non-traditional ways and traditional ways of reaching folks, I wonder about dedicated articles in both the Roanoke Tribune and the Roanoke Times. I know the Tribune will, they'll be glad to cooperate in whatever we can send them. I would hope that the Times would have similar cooperation. I think our media partners too. Any way that we can get the word out, in addition to what we're doing through social media and the website, it gives greater access to more people, and they're more fully aware of this intense work that we're doing right now. And that can help lead up to the public hearing and actually publicize that more broadly.
Yeah, I think we could use all of those channels to try both to solicit information and then point them to places where they could provide us additional information. So that's a good idea that I think definitely we can take advantage of.
Okay.
That helps. I appreciate that. Joe, those were the two kinds of questions in this part of the agenda that I just wanted to kind of cover as we go forward. And again, if anyone has any thoughts regarding other data or other information that you think would help this group, just email it to me, and we'll work on collecting that and bringing that into the conversation as well. And I should say too, because some of you already did this, any other ideas or information that you have access to that you just want to provide to the group, definitely feel free to do that also, because that has proven valuable already as we've gone through these conversations.
And I would just add to that, I think many of you have already been doing this, but all of us have a lot of different people, a lot of different circles or areas in the city that we navigate and that we have connections with. As you are having conversations with people of all ages, please talk about this. This is a great way to generate some of this idea sourcing right now to bring back to our meetings as we go forward. So don't just rely on the public hearing or what we push out in terms of media, but continue to have the conversations that you're having and bring that back to the meetings. It's really critical.
Yep, I agree.
Bob, are we now at announcements, next steps, and our next meeting?
We are. So, you know, the next meeting is scheduled for next Wednesday, so next July 8th. And again, it will be 11 until 1. We've been pretty good about staying kind of focused on the time that we've had, because I know it's a tough time since it's the middle of the day. And at that point, between now and then, one of the things that I'll be pushing out to the group I'll start taking the notes that you all have provided, and I'm going to start kind of creating a running list of, okay, these are the potential ideas and initiatives, so that we can start kind of working through that list, because we'll spend the better part of the next meeting really kind of refining those ideas and beginning the prioritization work as we move forward. So expect to see that. It'll probably be the first part of next week. I'll push that information out. And we'll continue to post information up on the website also, so that you can continue to access whatever might be there with it as well. And as I already mentioned, I'll send out the FAQs that came out recently from the Department of Treasury that'll help continue to give some additional information about what we can spend these dollars on. But otherwise, it will be July 8th, 11 to 1. What I'm going to do this time to avoid what happened this last time is I'll probably send one email that has just the invite information to make sure everyone gets that. And then I'll send another email that has content of what it is that we'll cover and stuff with it, rather than trying to blend those together. That way I'll be certain everyone gets the invite information. So, and
I would say, Bob, to the degree that we can just include links rather than attachments, especially if there are multiple, that might make it easier for people to access them.
Yeah, I think based on some of those that got bounced back, it's going to be a lot easier to focus on trying to find links if we're able to, and just use those. And again, we'll also put, where we're able to, we'll put the actual version of the information on the website, so you can go there too. So as we go along, that may just be easier. Oh, somebody's
not sure what happened there.
Let me just stop them. They just accidentally shared their screen. There you go.
We were sharing their screen, so gotta be careful.
Well, thank you all again for your time and investment in this. It's really important work that we're doing, and your willingness to show up and be present and to continue to engage as many voices in the community as we can to not only make sure that we have a great model for recovery, but also for resilience. I appreciate you all. Anything else before we adjourn?
That's it. Tommy, got your last comment. Thank you. And again, as Joe mentioned, all of the comments you all are putting in the chat get captured, and we use those then as a part of the notes that we'll put together and stuff. So I appreciate folks that have added those as well.
Tiffany and Bob, thank you and all the staff for your assistance today, and not only preparing for the meeting, but helping facilitate our breakout sessions. Thanks to all of you for your time and energy. We're making great progress, and I'll look forward to being with you all again next week on the 8th at 11 o'clock.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.